The blazing hot sun beat down mercilessly on Hazel Wright's raw, blistered skin as she fought to stay conscious. Her wrists and ankles bound cruelly to wooden stakes driven deep into the hard desert ground. The year was 1875, and what had begun as a simple journey to reunite with her uncle in Dallas had turned into a nightmare that threatened to be her last. Hazel's parched lips cracked painfully as she tried to moisten them with a tongue that felt like sandpaper. 3 days ago, the stagecoach she'd been traveling on had been ambushed by a gang of outlaws. The other passengers, 2 traveling salesmen and an elderly couple, had been shot without hesitation. Only Hazel had been spared, though the fate they had planned for her seemed far worse than a quick bullet. "She'll fetch a good price south of the border," the leader had said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "But first, let's have some fun." They'd tied her to the stakes in this god-forsaken stretch of desert, laughing as they poured her canteen's precious water onto the ground before her eyes. "We'll be back tomorrow, darlin'," the outlaw leader had promised with a yellow-toothed grin. "If you're still alive, we'll take you to your new home." That had been yesterday morning and they hadn't returned. Perhaps they'd been delayed, perhaps they'd forgotten her, perhaps they'd been caught. It didn't matter now. The sun was at its zenith, baking her alive, and Hazel knew she wouldn't survive another day. The heat distorted her vision, making the desert landscape waver before her eyes. Was that a rider approaching, or just another hallucination? She'd been seeing things for hours now: water, shade, her parents who died years ago in a Boston fire. This mirage wore a wide-brimmed hat and rode a chestnut horse, kicking up dust as it approached. But unlike the other visions, this one didn't fade away. It grew larger, more solid. Hazel tried to call out, but her voice was gone, stolen by thirst and heat. Still, she kept her eyes fixed on the approaching figure, afraid that if she blinked, he would vanish like all the others. The horseman drew closer, and Hazel could see him clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by his hat. He spotted her and spurred his horse, closing the distance between them in moments. "Good Lord," he muttered as he dismounted swiftly, his spurs jingling. He crouched beside her, his blue eyes widening in shock as he took in her condition. "Who did this to you, miss?" Hazel couldn't answer. Her eyes fluttered closed, consciousness slipping away. "No, no, stay with me," the stranger said urgently. She felt his hands working at the ropes that bound her wrists, his touch gentle despite his obvious haste. "Here, drink this." Something cool pressed against her cracked lips, his canteen. Water, precious, life-giving water. Hazel swallowed desperately, then choked as her body struggled to accept the sudden gift. "Easy now," the man cautioned, tilting the canteen to let just a trickle flow into her mouth. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Through the haze of her delirium, Hazel registered his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were startlingly blue against his tanned face, filled with concern. "You're safe now," he told her as he cut the last rope from her ankle. "I'm Yates Novak, and I'm going to get you out of here." Hazel tried to thank him, but darkness claimed her before she could form the words. When she regained consciousness, she was moving. Not on her own power, she was cradled against something solid and warm, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats beneath her. Her cheek rested against rough cotton, and an arm held her securely in place. Slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. She was on horseback, held firmly in front of Yates Novak as he guided his mount across the desert landscape. The sun was lower now, the worst of its heat beginning to wane as afternoon crept toward evening. "You're awake," Yates said, relief evident in his voice. "I was worried I'd found you too late." "Water," Hazel croaked, her first word in days. He immediately reached for his canteen, carefully supporting her as she drank. This time she managed small sips, feeling the blessed moisture revive her parched body. "Thank you," she whispered when she had drunk her fill. Her voice was barely audible, ravaged by the desert. "Save your strength," Yates advised. "My camp's about an hour's ride from here. You can rest properly there." Hazel nodded weakly and allowed herself to lean against his chest. Despite her ordeal, despite the fact that this man was a complete stranger, she felt safe. Perhaps it was merely the relief of rescue, or perhaps it was something in the careful way he held her, as if she were precious cargo that might break. Whatever the reason, for the first time in days, Hazel allowed herself to hope that she might actually survive. The rhythmic motion of the horse and the solid presence of her rescuer lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally rousing enough to accept sips of water when Yates offered them. As twilight descended, painting the desert in purple and gold, Yates guided his horse into a small canyon. A creek trickled along its base, a miraculous sight to Hazel's eyes, and a small camp had been established beneath an overhang that provided natural shelter. "Here we are," Yates said, carefully dismounting while still supporting her. With gentle hands, he lifted her down from the horse and carried her to a bedroll spread near a small fire pit. "This isn't much, but it's safe. The outlaws don't know about this place." As he settled her onto the bedroll, Hazel managed to focus her gaze on him. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice slightly stronger after the water. Yates busied himself with building a fire. "I've been tracking that gang for 2 weeks," he explained. "They've been raiding settlements and stagecoaches all through this territory. I came across the stagecoach you were on yesterday, but the trail was already cold." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry about the other passengers." "You're a lawman?" Hazel asked. A shadow crossed his face. "No, not anymore. Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing these men brought to justice." There was a story there, Hazel sensed, but she was too exhausted to pursue it. Instead, she watched as Yates efficiently built a small fire, filled a pot with water from the creek, and set it to boil. "You need food and more water," he said, rummaging through his saddlebags. "And I need to tend those sunburns and rope burns. You're in a bad way, miss." "Wright," she supplied. "Hazel Wright, Miss Wright." He nodded, the firelight illuminating his features. "You're lucky to be alive." "Another day out there." He didn't finish the thought. "I know," Hazel whispered. "Thank you for saving my life." Yates looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone, it was you." He cleared his throat and turned back to his supplies. "Let me fix you something to eat. Just broth at first, your stomach won't handle much else after what you've been through." As Yates prepared a simple meal, Hazel closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully process her narrow escape. The outlaws' faces flashed behind her eyelids, making her shudder. What would have happened if Yates hadn't found her? The thought made her stomach clench with fear. "Here," Yates said, his voice pulling her back to the present. He helped her sit up and handed her a tin cup of broth. "Sip it slowly." The broth was simple but flavorful, and Hazel hadn't realized how hungry she was until the warm liquid touched her lips. Still, she heeded his advice and drank carefully. "Where were you headed?" Yates asked as she ate. "Dallas," Hazel replied between sips. "My uncle lives there. After my parents died last year, I had nowhere else to go." Yates nodded. "Dallas is about 4 days' ride from here, assuming we don't run into trouble." Hazel questioned, surprised. "I can't very well leave you out here alone," Yates said matter-of-factly. "And those outlaws might still be looking for you. I'll see you safely to your uncle's." Gratitude washed over Hazel. "That's very kind, but I don't want to delay your pursuit of the outlaws." A hard look came into Yates's eyes. "They won't be going anywhere. I'll find them with or without a trail." Again, Hazel sensed there was more to his hunt than simple justice, but she was too exhausted to inquire further. She finished the broth and handed the cup back to him, her hands trembling with fatigue. "You should rest now," Yates said, taking the cup. "We'll talk more in the morning." He helped her lie back down on the bedroll, then moved to tend the fire. Hazel watched him through heavy-lidded eyes, taking in his profile against the flames. "Mr. Novak," she murmured, already half asleep. He looked over. "Yes. I'm glad it was you who found me." A small smile, the first she'd seen from him, touched his lips. "Get some sleep, Miss Wright." Hazel closed her eyes, surrendering to exhaustion, feeling safer than she had any right to feel in the middle of wild territory with a man she'd just met. But something told her Yates Novak was a man she could trust with her life. After all, she already had. The night passed peacefully with Hazel sleeping deeply, her body desperate for recovery. She woke just once, startled by a nightmare of rough hands and leering faces, to find Yates still awake, sitting by the fire with a rifle across his knees, keeping watch. "You're safe," he said quietly, not moving from his post. "Go back to sleep." And she did, lulled by the certainty of his protection. Dawn broke clear and cool, the brief respite of desert morning a blessing before the heat of day would return. Hazel woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Yates moving quietly around the camp. She opened her eyes, wincing as the movement pulled at her sunburnt skin. Her body ached everywhere, but her mind was clearer than it had been in days. "Good morning," Yates said, noticing she was awake. He brought her a cup of water. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been dragged behind a horse," Hazel admitted, accepting the water gratefully. "But alive, thanks to you." Yates crouched beside her, his eyes clinically assessing her condition. "Those burns need tending, and you're still dehydrated. We'll stay here today to let you recover your strength before heading to Dallas." "I don't want to delay you," Hazel began to protest. "It's not open for discussion," Yates cut her off, though his tone remained gentle. "You're in no condition to travel, and pushing too hard now could put you right back where you started." Hazel wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Even sitting up took more effort than it should have. "I have some salve for those burns," Yates continued, reaching for his saddlebag. "It'll help with the pain." He produced a small tin and opened it to reveal a pungent-smelling ointment. "It's not pretty, but it works. May I?" he asked, gesturing to her sunburned face and arms. Hazel nodded, suddenly self-conscious. She was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her once neat traveling dress torn and filthy, her hair a tangled mess, her skin blistered and raw. Yates seemed to sense her discomfort. "I was a medic during the war," he explained as he gently applied the salve to her burned forearms. "Treated all sorts of injuries. This is nothing compared to what I've seen." His touch was clinical and efficient, but gentle. As he worked, Hazel studied him more carefully than she had been able to the day before. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than she'd seen so far. A thin scar ran along his jaw, barely visible beneath his stubble. "Which side?" she asked, referring to his war service. "Union," he replied. 18th Wisconsin Infantry. He finished with her arms and hesitated. "Your face needs this too. Is that all right?" Hazel nodded, knowing that propriety was a luxury she couldn't afford in her current situation. She closed her eyes as his fingers gently applied the salve to her burned cheeks and forehead, trying not to think about how intimate this would seem in any other context. "There," he said after a moment, withdrawing his hand. "That should help with the worst of it." Hazel opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Yates cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "You should eat something. I've made porridge, nothing fancy, but it'll put some strength back in you." As he moved away to fetch the food, Hazel took the opportunity to try smoothing her tangled hair with her fingers. It was a futile effort, but it made her feel marginally more presentable. Yates returned with a bowl of simple porridge, sweetened with a bit of molasses. "Small bites," he advised as he handed it to her. "Your stomach needs to readjust to regular meals." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the gentle burble of the creek and the occasional call of a desert bird. When Hazel had finished as much as she could manage, she set the bowl aside and looked directly at Yates. "Mr. Novak," she began, "I owe you my life, and I'm grateful beyond words, but I sense there's more to your pursuit of these outlaws than you've told me. I'd like to understand what I've become involved in." Yates stared into the remains of the fire for a long moment, as if debating how much to share. Finally, he sighed and met her gaze. "The gang that took you is led by a man named Clay Harden," he said, his voice taking on a hard edge. 2 months ago, they raided a small homestead outside of Austin. They killed the husband, took everything of value. He paused, his jaw working, and they took the wife with them. Understanding dawned on Hazel. "Someone you knew, my sister," Yates said quietly. "Marion. She and her husband had just started their life together. I was on my way to visit them when." He shook his head, unable to continue. "I'm so sorry," Hazel whispered, her heart aching for him. The local sheriff and his men tried to track them, but the trail went cold. Said there was nothing more they could do. Bitterness tinged his words. "So I took up the hunt myself. I've been on their trail ever since, following rumors, tracking their movements. I was getting close when I found you." "And now I've delayed you," Hazel said, feeling guilty. "No," Yates said firmly. "Finding you was providence, Miss Wright. Not only because I could save your life, but because you can identify these men. You can help me find them and hopefully find Marion." Hope and determination mingled in his expression, and Hazel found herself nodding. "Of course I'll help, whatever you need." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. Once you're stronger, we'll head to Dallas. Your uncle can look after you while I continue the search." "No," Hazel said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I want to help find them." "Really help, not just give a description and then hide away safely." Yates frowned. "It's too dangerous. These men are killers." "I know exactly what they are," Hazel replied, her voice steady despite the fear that flickered through her at the memory. "They killed everyone else on that stagecoach without hesitation. They staked me out to die in the sun, and they took your sister." She met his eyes squarely. "I won't rest easily knowing they're still out there doing the same to others." Yates studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "It's not a path I'd choose for any woman," he said finally, "but I understand your feelings." He sighed. "Let's get you to Dallas first. We can discuss next steps with your uncle." It wasn't exactly agreement, but it wasn't refusal either. Hazel decided to accept it for now. "Tell me about yourself," she said, changing the subject. "How does a Union Army medic end up tracking outlaws in Texas?" A faint smile touched Yates's lips. "That's a long story." "We have all day," Hazel reminded him, "and I'd like to know more about the man who saved my life." Yates settled more comfortably by the fire. "I grew up in Wisconsin's small town you've never heard of, enlisted when the war broke out like most young fools with something to prove." His expression grew distant. "Saw more death in 4 years than any man should see in a lifetime." "Is that why you became a medic?" Hazel asked. "Partly. I had some training. My father was the town doctor, but mostly I couldn't stomach the killing anymore." He poked at the fire with a stick. "After the war I came west. Thought I'd start fresh where nobody knew me, maybe practice medicine properly." "What happened?" "Life," Yates said simply. "Worked as a ranch hand, then a deputy in a small town near Austin. That's where Marion met her husband, Jack." He had land, wanted to build something. His expression darkened. They had it all planned out, then Hardin and his gang came through. Hazel could hear the pain beneath his matter-of-fact recounting. "And you've been hunting them ever since?" Yates nodded. "I'll find them, and when I do." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The cold determination in his eyes said everything. A shiver ran through Hazel despite the growing heat of the day. What would happen when Yates found the outlaws? What kind of justice was he seeking? She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "What about you?" Yates asked, clearly wanting to shift the focus. "What's your story, Miss Wright?" Hazel adjusted her position, wincing as her sore muscles protested. "Less eventful than yours. I grew up in Boston. My father owned a shipping business, modest but successful enough. I had a comfortable life, a good education." She twisted a loose thread on her tattered sleeve. "Then there was a fire. The warehouse burned and my parents' home with it. They didn't survive." "I'm sorry," Yates said quietly. Hazel nodded, accepting his sympathy. "It was a year ago. I stayed with friends while the estate was settled, but there wasn't much left after the debts were paid. My uncle in Dallas is my only living relative. He wrote offering me a home, so..." She gestured vaguely. "Here I am, or here I almost wasn't, thanks to Mr. Hardin and his gang." "Your uncle will be worried when you don't arrive on schedule." "I'm already late," Hazel admitted. "The stagecoach was supposed to reach Dallas 3 days ago. I just hope he doesn't give up on me arriving at all." "We'll get word to him as soon as we reach civilization," Yates assured her. "For now, you should rest some more. We have a long journey ahead." Hazel wanted to protest that she'd rested enough, but her body betrayed her with a sudden wave of exhaustion. She nodded reluctantly. "Will you tell me more later, about Marion?" A shadow passed over Yates's face, but he nodded. "Rest now, Miss Wright." Hazel lay back on the bedroll, closing her eyes. Despite the trauma of the past days, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt strangely at peace in this moment. Safe, protected. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Yates moving quietly around the camp, the sounds oddly comforting. Her last conscious thought was a realization that this man, this stranger who had appeared like a miracle in the desert, was already becoming important to her in ways she couldn't quite define. The day passed quietly as Hazel alternated between sleeping and short periods of wakefulness. Each time she woke, Yates was there, offering water or food, applying more salve to her burns, or simply sitting nearby, keeping watch. By evening, she felt significantly stronger, though still far from her usual self. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in vivid orange and gold, Yates built up the fire for the night. Hazel sat wrapped in a blanket despite the lingering heat, watching as he prepared a more substantial meal than they'd had that morning. "Rabbit stew," he explained as he added herbs to the pot hanging over the flames. "You need real food to rebuild your strength." "You're a man of many talents, Mr. Novak," Hazel observed. Doctor, tracker, cook. A genuine smile briefly lit his features. "Jack, my brother-in-law, used to say I was a jack of all trades, master of none." "I don't believe that," Hazel said. "You seem very competent at everything you do." Yates looked almost embarrassed by the compliment. "Necessity teaches quick," he said with a shrug. "Out here you learn to do whatever needs doing or you don't survive long." "Is that why you came west, for the challenge?" Yates stirred the stew thoughtfully. "Partly. Mostly I came because the war left me, restless, couldn't settle back into small-town life, too many memories, too many ghosts." He glanced at her. "The open country has a way of putting things in perspective, makes a man's troubles seem smaller against all this space and sky." "Until new troubles find you," Hazel said softly. "Yes," Yates agreed, his expression darkening. "Until then." They fell silent as Yates continued preparing the meal. Hazel watched him, noting the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence in everything he did. There was something deeply reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel anchored in a world that had recently proven how chaotic it could be. When the stew was ready, Yates filled 2 tin bowls and handed one to Hazel. The rich aroma made her stomach growl embarrassingly loudly, drawing a chuckle from Yates. "Sounds like you're recovering your appetite," he remarked. Hazel smiled, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "It smells wonderful." They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the fire casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls around them. The night air grew cooler, a blessed relief after the day's heat. "Tell me about Marion," Hazel said when they had finished eating. "What is she like?" Yates set his empty bowl aside, his expression softening at the mention of his sister. "She's stubborn," he said, a fond note entering his voice. "Always has been, even as a little girl, 4 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way she'd boss me around." Hazel smiled, encouraging him to continue. "Smart, too, smarter than me by far, could have been a teacher or even gone to college if she'd been born a man." He shook his head. "Instead, she married Jack and came west. She was so excited about their homestead, wrote me letters full of plans for the house they'd build, the farm they'd create." His voice caught and Hazel's heart ached for him. "She sounds wonderful," she said gently. "She is," Yates replied firmly. "Is not was. I have to believe she's still alive." "Of course," Hazel agreed quickly, "and we'll find her." Yates looked at her across the fire, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "Why are you so determined to help? After what you've been through, most people would want to get as far from danger as possible." Hazel considered the question carefully. "When my parents died," she said slowly, "I felt powerless. There was nothing I could do to save them, nothing I could do to change what happened. It was a horrible feeling." She met his gaze steadily. "When those outlaws left me to die, I felt that same powerlessness. I don't want to feel that way again. I want to have some control over what happens next." Understanding dawned in Yates's expression. "You want justice." "I want to help prevent what happened to me and your sister from happening to anyone else," Hazel clarified. "If that's justice, then yes." Yates studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're a remarkable woman, Miss Wright. Hazel, she said impulsively. After everything, I think you can call me Hazel. A small smile touched his lips. Hazel, he agreed, and I'm Yates. The simple exchange of first names felt strangely significant, as if they had crossed some invisible boundary. Hazel found herself smiling back at him, warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through her chest. The moment was broken when Yates stood and moved to check his horse, tethered nearby. We should turn in early, he said over his shoulder. If you're feeling up to it, we'll start for Dallas tomorrow. It's a long ride and we'll need to take it slow for your sake. I'll be ready, Hazel assured him, unwilling to be the cause of further delay. When Yates returned to the fire, he carried an extra blanket. The nights get cold, he explained, handing it to her, and you're still recovering. Can't have you taking a chill. His thoughtfulness touched her. Thank you. I'll keep watch for a while, Yates said, settling on the opposite side of the fire with his rifle across his knees. Get some sleep. Hazel arranged the blankets and lay down, watching Yates through the flames. His profile was strong, his posture alert despite what must have been his own exhaustion. He had likely slept little the previous night, too busy keeping guard over her. Yates, she said softly. He looked up. Yes. You should rest too. You can't keep watch every night. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I've gone longer without sleep. Don't worry about me. That's not fair, Hazel protested. You can't ask me not to worry about you when you spend all your time worrying about me. That drew a genuine chuckle from him, the sound unexpectedly warming. Fair point. I'll rest soon, I promise. Satisfied, Hazel closed her eyes. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Yates's steady gaze across the fire, keeping watch over her through the night. Morning dawned with the promise of another scorching day. Hazel woke feeling significantly stronger, though her muscles still ached and her skin remained tender from the sunburn. She sat up to find Yates already awake, tending a small breakfast fire. How are you feeling? He asked, glancing up from the coffee he was brewing. Better, Hazel replied honestly. Still sore, but I think I can manage a day's travel. Yates nodded, though his eyes assessed her critically. We'll take it slow and stop if you need to. No point pushing too hard and setting back your recovery. After a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit, washed down with strong coffee, Yates helped Hazel to her feet. She swayed slightly, still weaker than she had realized, and his hand immediately went to her elbow to steady her. I'm all right, she assured him, though she didn't pull away from his supporting grip. Just need to get my legs under me. Take your time, Yates said, keeping his hand on her arm until she nodded that she was stable. While Yates packed up the camp and saddled his horse, Hazel made her way slowly to the creek. The cool water was a blessing on her face and hands, and she did her best to tidy her appearance. Her dress was beyond salvation torn, stained and filthy, but she smoothed it as best she could, and attempted to arrange her tangled hair into some semblance of order. When she returned to camp, Yates was waiting with the horse ready. He had also prepared a wide-brimmed hat for her, fashioned from what looked like a spare piece of canvas. It's not pretty, he said, offering it to her, but it'll keep the sun off your face. Your skin can't take much more exposure. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Hazel accepted the makeshift hat and placed it on her head. How do I look? She asked, attempting a smile. Like someone who survived hell, Yates replied honestly. Then more softly, he added, beautiful all the same. Before Hazel could process the unexpected compliment, Yates turned to the horse. I'll lift you up first, then mount behind you. It'll be easier to support you that way. With strong hands at her waist, he lifted her onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. Hazel found herself acutely aware of his proximity, his chest solid against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. Comfortable? He asked, his voice close to her ear. Yes, she managed, though comfortable wasn't precisely the word she would have chosen. The intimacy of their position was both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Let me know if you need to stop, Yates said as he urged the horse forward, out of the canyon and back into the open desert. The day stretched long before them, the landscape shimmering under the relentless sun. Yates kept their pace steady but unhurried, mindful of Hazel's condition. They spoke little, conserving energy in the heat, but the silence between them was companionable rather than awkward. Around midday, when the sun was at its fiercest, Yates guided the horse into the shadow of a rocky outcropping. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting first before reaching up to help Hazel down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Yates caught her against him, his arms strong around her waist. "Easy," he murmured. Hazel was acutely conscious of their proximity, of his hands steady at her waist, of the concern in his blue eyes as they met hers. "I'm all right," she said, though she made no move to step away, "just stiff from riding." For a moment they stood locked in that position, something unspoken passing between them. Then Yates cleared his throat and gently set her away from him. "You should sit and rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll see to the horse." Hazel sank down in the meager shade, watching as Yates unsaddled the horse and gave it water. There was an economy to his movements, a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of self-reliance. She found herself wondering about the life he'd led, the experiences that had shaped him into the man who had appeared like a miracle in the desert to save her. When Yates had finished tending to the horse, he joined Hazel in the shade, offering her the canteen. As she drank, he studied the horizon, his expression distant. "What are you thinking?" Hazel asked, handing the canteen back to him. Yates took a drink before answering. "About what happens when we reach Dallas," he said. "I need to resume tracking Hardin and his gang, but I can't in good conscience leave you until I'm sure you're safe with your uncle." "And once you're sure of that," Hazel asked, "you'll continue the search alone." Yates met her gaze directly. "It's my fight, Hazel." "It's mine now, too," she reminded him. "I want to help find your sister." A frown creased his brow. "It's too dangerous. These men have already nearly killed you once." "All the more reason why I should help stop them," Hazel insisted. "I can identify them. I know their faces, their voices. I can help track them." "And if we find them, what then?" Yates challenged. "These aren't men who will surrender peacefully to the law." "I understand that," Hazel said quietly. "I'm not naive, Yates. I've seen what they're capable of." Yates studied her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. "Let's get you to Dallas first," he finally said. "We can discuss next steps then." It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't outright refusal either. Hazel decided to accept it for now. "How much farther is it to Dallas?" 3 days, maybe 4 at this pace," Yates replied. "We'll need to stop in a small settlement called Riverton tomorrow to replenish supplies." "And to send word to my uncle," Hazel added. "He'll be frantic by now." Yates nodded. "That too." He glanced at the sky, gauging the sun's position. "We should move on. There's a small waterhole about 2 hours' ride from here where we can make camp for the night." He helped Hazel to her feet, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Their eyes met briefly, and Hazel felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her physical condition. Back on the trail, with Yates's arms around her as he guided the horse, Hazel found herself increasingly aware of his presence. The solid warmth of his chest against her back, the clean scent of him mingled with horse and leather, the careful way he held her to ensure her comfort. It was strange how quickly this man had become important to her, how swiftly she had come to trust him and rely on him. Was it simply gratitude for her rescue? Or was it something more, something deeper taking root in the aftermath of shared danger and quiet conversation around the fire? Hazel didn't have answers to these questions, and now was hardly the time to dwell on them. Still, as they rode across the vast landscape, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen when they reached Dallas, when her reliance on Yates was no longer a necessity of survival. Would he simply continue his hunt alone, leaving her behind? Or had this unexpected meeting somehow altered the path ahead for both of them? The sun was low in the western sky when they reached the waterhole Yates had mentioned. It was little more than a muddy pool surrounded by scrubby vegetation, but the sight of water was welcome nonetheless. "Not much to look at," Yates commented as he helped Hazel down from the horse, "but the water's clean enough if you know where to dip." He kept his hand at her waist until he was certain she was steady. How are you holding up?" "I'm all right," Hazel assured him, though in truth, her body ached from the long hours in the saddle and her head throbbed with the beginnings of a headache. "Just tired." Yates's eyes saw more than she wanted them to. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Sit and rest while I set up camp." Too exhausted to argue, Hazel found a relatively comfortable spot beneath a stunted tree and watched as Yates efficiently went about establishing their camp for the night. There was something oddly domestic about the scene. Yates tending to the horse, gathering what little firewood could be found, preparing a simple meal from their provisions. In another context, they might have been any frontier couple making their way west, instead of near strangers thrown together by violence and desperation. The thought startled Hazel, and she quickly pushed it away. This was not the time for such fancies. She needed to focus on recovery, on reaching Dallas, on helping Yates find his sister, not on the way her heart seemed to beat a little faster when he looked at her. After a simple meal of beans and hardtack, Yates checked Hazel's sunburns, his touch gentle as he applied more of the healing salve. "You're healing well," he said, his fingers carefully treating the burns on her wrists where the ropes had chafed. "Another few days and the worst of it will be behind you." "Thanks to your care," Hazel said softly. Yates glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers. Something passed between them, a current of understanding or perhaps something deeper. "I should check the area," he said abruptly, releasing her wrist and standing. "Make sure we're alone out here." While Yates made his rounds of their small camp, rifle in hand, Hazel settled herself on the bedroll he had prepared for her. She was exhausted, every muscle aching, but her mind remained alert, processing the events of the past days. Yates returned to the fire, his expression unreadable. "All clear," he reported, setting his rifle within easy reach. "But I'll keep watch just in case." "You need to rest too," Hazel said, echoing her concern from the previous night. "You can't go without sleep indefinitely." A small smile touched Yates's lips. "I'll rest," he promised. "Just not yet," Hazel frowned. "You're exhausted too, I can see it in your face." "I've been through worse," Yates said dismissively. "That doesn't mean you need to push yourself to the brink now." Hazel patted the ground beside her bedroll. "At least sit and rest a while." Yates hesitated, then relented, settling himself on the ground near her, his back against a small boulder. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the weariness in his eyes. "Tell me more about Wisconsin," Hazel said, hoping conversation might help him relax. "What was your hometown like?" Yates gazed into the fire, a faint smile touching his lips. "Small, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business." Main Street had a general store, a church, and not much else. He glanced at her. "Very different from Boston, I imagine." "Very," Hazel agreed. "Though perhaps not as different as you might think. Small communities form even in big cities." "My mother knew everything about everyone on our street, and they knew everything about us." "Is that why you were willing to come west, to escape the fishbowl?" Hazel considered the question. "Partly," she admitted. "After my parents died, the sympathy became stifling. Every conversation, every interaction was colored by it. I needed a fresh start." "And instead, you found disaster," Yates said grimly. "I found you," Hazel corrected him gently. "Without the ambush, our paths might never have crossed." Yates looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Do you believe in fate, Hazel?" The question surprised her. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "I believe that things happen for a reason, though the reason isn't always clear at the time." She met his gaze steadily. "Do you?" "I didn't," Yates replied. "Not until recently." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Finding you in that desert, the timing of it, it feels like more than chance." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Hazel's heart quickened its pace. "What does it feel like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like Providence," Yates said, echoing what he'd said earlier. "Like I was meant to find you." The intensity of his gaze made Hazel's breath catch in her throat. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the small distance between them, but something held her back, uncertainty, perhaps, or the lingering awareness of how little they truly knew each other. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Yates broke the spell, looking away to tend the fire. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Disappointed but understanding the retreat, Hazel nodded. "Promise me you'll rest too," she said. Yates looked back at her, his expression softening. "I promise." Satisfied, Hazel settled into her bedroll, watching Yates through half-closed eyes as fatigue claimed her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was his profile against the starlit sky, strong and steady, keeping watch over her through the night. The journey to Riverton the next day was harder than Hazel had anticipated. The sun beat down mercilessly, and despite Yates's makeshift hat protecting her face, she felt its heat sapping her strength hour by hour. Her body, still recovering from the ordeal in the desert, protested the continued exertion. Yates seemed to sense her struggle without her having to voice it. He found more frequent places to stop and rest, and kept the pace slower than the previous day. His arm around her waist was firm yet gentle, supporting her when she flagged. "Not much farther," he murmured near midday, his breath warm against her ear. "Another hour, maybe two." Hazel nodded, not trusting her voice. The dizziness that had been threatening all morning was growing worse, her vision occasionally blurring at the edges. She leaned back slightly, allowing herself to rest more fully against Yates's solid chest, his arm tightened around her. "Hazel. Are you all right?" "Just tired," she managed, the words coming out weaker than she intended. Yates reined the horse to a stop and shifted to see her face. Concern deepened the lines around his eyes. "You're too pale," he said, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. "We're pushing too hard." "No," Hazel protested, rallying her strength. "We need to reach Riverton. I can manage." Yates looked unconvinced but nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we'll stop here for a few minutes first." He dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, Hazel's knees buckled. Yates caught her against his chest, his arms strong around her waist. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mortified by her weakness. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "You've been through hell," Yates reminded her, his voice gentle. "Your body's still recovering." He guided her to a small patch of shade and helped her sit. "Here, drink this." He offered the canteen. The water helped clear Hazel's head slightly, the dizziness receding to a manageable level. Yates crouched beside her, watching her with worried eyes. "Better?" he asked when she handed the canteen back. "Yes," Hazel assured him. "I think I just got too hot." Yates nodded, though concern still lined his face. "We'll rest a bit longer. Riverton can wait another hour." They remained in the shade for nearly half an hour, Yates insisting that Hazel drink more water and eat a little of their remaining provisions. By the time they resumed their journey, she felt somewhat stronger, though still far from her normal self. Riverton appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a small cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat haze. As they drew closer, the settlement took more definite shape, a main street with perhaps a dozen buildings, including a general store, a small church, and what appeared to be a saloon. "Not much," Yates commented, "but they'll have supplies and a telegraph office, maybe even a real bed for you tonight." The prospect of a proper bed was so appealing that Hazel nearly wept with relief. "That sounds like heaven," she admitted. As they rode into town, Hazel was acutely conscious of the stares they attracted. It was hardly surprising she knew she must look a fright in her torn, filthy dress, with her sunburned face and wild hair. Even Yates, with his trail-worn appearance and several days' worth of stubble, drew curious glances. Yates guided the horse directly to a small building with a weathered sign proclaiming it the Riverton Hotel. It was a generous description for what was essentially a large house with rooms to let, but to Hazel's eyes, it looked like the finest establishment imaginable. "Wait here," Yates said, helping her down from the horse and making sure she was steady on her feet. "I'll arrange rooms." Hazel nodded, too exhausted to argue. She leaned against a hitching post, watching as Yates disappeared into the hotel. The few people on the street continued to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Hazel straightened as best she could, lifting her chin despite her bedraggled appearance. Yates returned quickly, satisfaction evident in his expression. "2 rooms," he reported. And the owner's wife is preparing hot water for a bath for you. He offered his arm. Can you walk, or shall I carry you? The idea of being carried through the town in full view of its inhabitants was mortifying. I can walk, Hazel assured him, taking his arm gratefully. The hotel's interior was simple but clean, with a small common room and a narrow staircase leading to the second floor. The owner's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, met them at the foot of the stairs. Land sakes, she exclaimed, taking in Hazel's appearance. What happened to you, child? Stagecoach ambush, Yates answered before Hazel could speak. Miss Wright was the only survivor. I found her 2 days ago. The woman's eyes widened in shock. Those awful hardened boys, she said, shaking her head. They've been terrorizing these parts for months now. She took Hazel's free hand in her own. You poor dear, come along, I've got hot water waiting for you and I'll find you something clean to wear. Hazel glanced at Yates, reluctant to be separated from him after the days they'd spent in constant company. Go on, he encouraged her. Get some rest. I'll arrange for supplies and send a telegram to your uncle. He hesitated, then added, I'll be here when you're ready. Reassured, Hazel allowed the hotel owner's wife, who introduced herself as Mrs. Abernathy, to lead her upstairs to a small but clean room containing a wooden tub already filled with steaming water. You take your time, dear, Mrs. Abernathy said kindly. I'll leave a dress on the bed. It belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Austin, but it should fit you well enough. And I'll have some food sent up too. Left alone, Hazel nearly wept at the sight of the bath. She shed her ruined dress and undergarments with shaking hands and sank into the hot water with a sigh that came from her very soul. The heat soothed her aching muscles and seemed to wash away not only the physical grime of the desert, but some of the fear and horror as well. She bathed thoroughly, washing her hair 3 times before the water finally ran clear. By the time she emerged from the tub, the water was cold and murky, but Hazel felt reborn. The dress Mrs. Abernathy had left was a simple blue calico, a bit loose in the bodice, but otherwise a reasonable fit. There was even a hairbrush and a small hand mirror on the washstand. When Hazel finally looked at her reflection, she hardly recognized herself. Her face was still red and peeling from sunburn, her eyes shadowed with fatigue, her cheekbones more prominent than they had been before her ordeal. But she was clean, her hair nearly arranged, and she was alive, which was more than she had dared hope for when she was staked out in the desert. A knock at the door announced the arrival of food, a tray bearing a bowl of fragrant stew, fresh bread, and a pot of tea. Hazel ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that her stomach might rebel if she rushed. When she had finished, she felt truly human again for the first time in days. Another knock came as she was setting aside the tray. Yes, she called. It's Yates, came the reply. May I come in? Hazel smoothed her borrowed dress, suddenly self-conscious. Yes, please do. The door opened to reveal Yates, and Hazel was momentarily startled by his appearance. He had clearly taken the opportunity to clean up as well. His face was freshly shaved, his hair damp from washing, and he wore a clean shirt that looked newly purchased. Without the trail, dust, and stubble, he looked younger, though no less formidable. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes taking in her transformed appearance. You look. He began, then seemed at a loss for words. Better, I hope, Hazel said with a small smile. I certainly feel better. Beautiful, Yates finished, his voice low. You look beautiful, Hazel. The compliment sent warmth flooding through her cheeks. Thank you, she said softly. You look quite handsome yourself. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. Clean, at least. He held up a small brown paper package. I brought something for your burns. The general store had a better salve than what I've been using. Thank you, Hazel said, genuinely touched by his continued thoughtfulness. Were you able to send a telegram to my uncle? Yates nodded, stepping further into the room. Yes, to a Mr. Howard Wright in Dallas. I explained that you're safe and that will arrive in a few days. He hesitated. I hope that was all right. More than all right, Hazel assured him. I'm grateful. She gestured to a chair near the window. Please sit. You must be exhausted. Yates settled into the chair, setting the package of salve on the small table beside it. "I've arranged for supplies to be ready in the morning," he said, "and I've bought a second horse. It'll be easier on both of us if we each ride separately from here on." The thought of not sharing a saddle with Yates brought an unexpected pang of disappointment, which Hazel quickly suppressed. Of course, it made sense to have separate horses now that they were in civilization. Their previous arrangement had been born of necessity, nothing more. "That's sensible," she agreed. "Did you learn anything about the Harden gang while you were making arrangements?" Yates's expression darkened. "They passed through here about a week ago, heading south. The sheriff's been tracking them but hasn't had any luck." He ran a hand through his damp hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "They're staying ahead of the law, but not by much. If we push hard, we might catch up to them before they cross into Mexico." "We?" Hazel questioned, noting his use of the plural. Yates met her gaze directly. "If you're still determined to help," he said, "I won't try to dissuade you further. But Hazel, you need to understand what you're getting into. These men won't hesitate to kill you or worse if they catch you again." "I understand the risks," Hazel said quietly, "but I can't simply go to Dallas and pretend this never happened. Not when your sister is still out there, and not when these men are free to hurt others." She leaned forward, holding his gaze. "I want to help, Yates. I need to." For a long moment, Yates studied her as if measuring her resolve. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But you'll follow my lead, and if I say something's too dangerous, you'll listen." "Agreed, agreed," Hazel said, relief washing over her. She hadn't realized until that moment how important it was to her to remain by Yates's side to see this through to the end. "We should leave at first light," Yates continued, standing. "Get as much rest as you can tonight." He moved to the door, then paused, looking back at her. "I'm glad you're feeling better, Hazel." "Yates," she called as he reached for the doorknob. He turned, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you," Hazel said simply, "for everything." Something softened in his expression. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." After Yates left, Hazel moved to the window, looking out at the small town bathed in the golden light of sunset. So much had changed in such a short time. A week ago, she had been on her way to a new life in Dallas, full of uncertainty but also hope. Now she was embarking on a dangerous hunt for outlaws, alongside a man she barely knew yet trusted completely. And more than trusted, if she was honest with herself. There was something growing between them, something that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Hazel wasn't naive about these matters. She recognized the flutter in her chest when Yates looked at her, the warmth that spread through her at his touch. It was too soon, perhaps even foolish, to be developing such feelings. They were in the midst of danger, focused on finding his sister and bringing murderers to justice. Romance had no place in such a mission. And yet, as Hazel prepared for bed in the simple room that felt luxurious after nights under the stars, she couldn't help but wonder what might happen when their mission was complete. Would Yates simply ride away, his duty to her discharged? Or was there a possibility of something more, something lasting? Such thoughts were premature, Hazel told herself firmly as she slipped between the clean sheets. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, she needed to rest and recover her strength for the journey ahead. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every time Hazel closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the outlaws who had left her to die, heard their laughter as they rode away. The memory of thirst and helplessness was still too fresh, too raw. When she finally did sleep, it was to dream of Yates finding her in the desert only in the dream. He arrived too late, finding only a sun-bleached skeleton staked to the ground, forever waiting for rescue. She woke with a stifled scream, her heart pounding, sweat dampening her borrowed nightgown despite the cool night air. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then reality reasserted itself: the small hotel room in Riverton, the comfortable bed, the safety of walls and a locked door. Taking deep breaths to calm herself, Hazel rose and moved to the window. The town was quiet, moonlight silvering the dusty main street. In one of the other rooms of this small hotel, Yates was sleeping, or perhaps lying awake as she was, planning their next move or worrying about his sister. The thought brought a measure of comfort. She wasn't alone in this. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. With that reassurance, Hazel returned to bed and eventually fell into a dreamless sleep that lasted until dawn. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of another scorching day. Hazel dressed in her borrowed dress, grateful for its clean simplicity, and arranged her hair as neatly as possible. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was still marked by her ordeal, but there was a new determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A knock at her door announced Yates's arrival. He looked ready for the trail, dressed in practical clothing with his gun belt strapped securely around his waist. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes taking in her appearance with approval. "Yes," Hazel replied, gathering the few possessions she now had. The package of salve Yates had brought, a hairbrush Mrs. Abernathy had given her, and a small drawstring bag containing provisions for the journey. Downstairs, Mrs. Abernathy insisted they eat a hearty breakfast before departing. "Can't have you facing outlaws on an empty stomach," she declared, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before them. As they ate, the older woman fussed over them, clearly having adopted them as temporary charges. "I've packed sandwiches for your journey," she told Hazel. "And there's a spare dress in your saddlebag, not as fine as what you're probably used to, but sturdy enough for travel." "You're very kind," Hazel said, genuinely touched by the woman's generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." Mrs. Abernathy waved away her gratitude. "Just be careful out there," she said, her expression growing serious. "Those Harden boys are bad business, the things they've done." She shook her head. "You make sure this young man takes good care of you." "I will, madam," Yates assured her, his voice solemn, "with my life." The intensity of his declaration brought a flush to Hazel's cheeks and a knowing look to Mrs. Abernathy's eyes. "Well then," the older woman said, a slight smile playing at her lips, "I think Miss Wright is in good hands." Outside, 2 horses waited at the hitching rail, Yates's chestnut gelding and a smaller bay mare. Saddlebags bulged with supplies, and everything was prepared for their departure. "Mrs. Abernathy said her name is Penny," Yates said, nodding toward the bay mare. "She's gentle but sure-footed." "Should serve you well." Hazel approached the horse, extending her hand to let the animal catch her scent. The mare's soft nose nudged her palm, and Hazel felt an immediate connection. "She's lovely," she said, stroking the horse's neck. Yates helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and when Hazel met his eyes, she saw something there that made her breath catch a warmth, an awareness that mirrored her own feelings. Then the moment passed, and Yates was mounting his own horse with fluid grace. "The sheriff said the Harden gang was heading toward the border," he said, all business now. "We'll follow their trail as best we can. If we're lucky, we might catch up to them before they cross into Mexico." "And if they've already crossed?" Hazel asked, Yates's expression hardened. "Then we follow them. I won't stop until I find Marion." With that declaration hanging in the air, they rode out of Riverton, the small town quickly falling behind them as they headed south toward the distant Mexican border. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and occasional stands of mesquite trees. The heat remained constant, but Hazel found she was adjusting to it, her body recovering its strength day by day. They rode steadily, stopping only to rest the horses and take brief meals in whatever shade they could find. Yates remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of danger or any trace of the gang they pursued. By late afternoon, they had reached a small river, its banks lined with cottonwood trees offering blessed shade. Yates called a halt, declaring they would make camp early to allow the horses to rest properly. "We're making good time," he said as he helped Hazel dismount. His hands lingered at her waist, and their eyes met briefly before he stepped back. "Another 2 days should bring us to the border, assuming the weather holds." Hazel nodded, stretching to ease the stiffness in her back and legs. Despite her improving condition, the long day in the saddle had taken its toll. "Do you think we're gaining on them?" Yates frowned, looking south across the river. Hard to say. We passed some tracks a few miles back that might have been theirs, but they're at least 3 days old. He shook his head. They have a good lead on us. Disappointment flickered across Hazel's face. Then we might be too late to stop them crossing into Mexico. Maybe, Yates conceded, but they'll have to stop somewhere. Men like Hardin can't resist the temptation of a town, even a Mexican one. They'll want to spend their stolen money, find entertainment. His expression darkened. That's when we'll catch up to them. There was something in his tone that sent a chill through Hazel despite the heat of the day. What will you do when we find them? She asked quietly. Yates met her gaze directly, his blue eyes hard as flint. Whatever I have to do to get Marion back. The simplicity of the statement belied the complexity behind it. Hazel knew without asking that Yates was prepared to kill to rescue his sister, and perhaps even if rescue proved impossible. And justice for the others they've hurt, Hazel asked. The people on my stagecoach, your brother-in-law. That too, Yates said, his voice softening slightly. But Marion comes first. She's all the family I have left. Hazel nodded, understanding his priority even as she wondered what it would mean for them for whatever was growing between them when his mission was complete. While Yates tended to the horses, Hazel set about establishing their camp. She had learned much from watching him over the past days and took pride in her growing competence with these frontier tasks. By the time Yates returned, she had a small fire going and water boiling for coffee. Impressive, he commented, a genuine smile lighting his features. You're a quick study, Miss Wright. I had a good teacher, Hazel replied, returning his smile. Though I doubt Boston society would recognize me now. Yates studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Do you miss it? Your life before? The question gave Hazel pause. Did she miss the strict social expectations, the endless rounds of teas and calls, the carefully controlled environment where a woman's worth was measured by her marriage prospects? Not as much as I expected to, she admitted. There's a freedom here that I never had there despite the dangers. Freedom comes with responsibility, Yates observed, settling beside her near the fire. The freedom to choose also means the freedom to face the consequences of those choices. Are you trying to warn me off again? Hazel asked, a note of challenge in her voice. Yates shook his head. No. I'm beginning to understand that you know your own mind, Hazel Wright. I respect that, even if it terrifies me to think of you facing Hardin and his gang again. The admission surprised her. You're afraid? You don't seem afraid of anything. A humorless laugh escaped him. I'm afraid of plenty. Failing to find Marion, losing her even if I do find her. He paused, his eyes meeting Hazel's. Losing you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Hazel's heart quickened its pace as she realized the significance of what he'd said and what he hadn't said. Yates, she began, uncertain how to respond. He shook his head, breaking the moment. We should eat, he said, his tone deliberately lighter. Tomorrow will be another long day. The abrupt shift left Hazel feeling off balance, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she helped prepare their simple meal, conscious of Yates's presence beside her, of the unspoken current that ran between them. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and Hazel found herself shivering despite the fire's warmth. Yates noticed immediately. Here, he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it over her shoulders. Can't have you catching a chill. The coat was still warm from his body, carrying his scent leather, horses, and something distinctly Yates. Hazel pulled it closer around herself, murmuring her thanks. We should turn in early, Yates suggested, banking the fire for the night. Dawn comes quickly out here. They had established a routine over their days together, Hazel sleeping while Yates kept watch for the first part of the night, then Yates taking his rest while Hazel maintained a vigil. Tonight, however, Yates hesitated as Hazel prepared her bedroll. Hazel, he said, his voice low in the gathering darkness, about what I said earlier. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Yes, Yates seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for a man who generally spoke plainly. I want you to know that no matter what happens when we find Hardin and his gang, He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. I'm glad our paths crossed, despite the circumstances. It wasn't quite what Hazel had hoped to hear, but she understood the sentiment behind the careful words. So am I, she replied softly. More than I can say. Their eyes held across the dying fire, the connection between them almost tangible in the night air. Then Yates nodded and moved to take up his position for the first watch, the moment passing but not forgotten. As Hazel settled into her bedroll, she found herself wondering what would happen when their mission was complete. Would Yates return to his solitary life, or might he consider a different path? And what of her plans to live with her uncle in Dallas? The future that had seemed so certain just days ago now felt fluid, full of possibilities both frightening and exhilarating. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Hazel drifted into sleep, the sound of Yates moving quietly around their camp a reassuring presence in the darkness. The next day dawned clear and hot, the sun quickly burning away the night's coolness. They broke camp efficiently, working together with the ease of partners who had known each other far longer than their actual acquaintance. As they rode, Hazel found herself studying Yates's profile against the endless blue sky. The lines of his face had become familiar to her, dear even in the short time they'd known each other. She knew the furrow that appeared between his brows when he was worried, the rare smile that transformed his serious expression, the intensity in his eyes when he spoke of his sister. Around midday, Yates suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. Hazel followed his gaze to a distant plume of dust rising from behind a hill. "Riders," Yates said tersely, "several of them moving fast." Hazel felt her heart rate quicken. "The Harden gang, possibly?" Yates scanned the landscape, quickly assessing their position. "There's a stand of trees near that dry creek bed. We'll take cover there and see who they are before we show ourselves." They urged their horses toward the meager shelter, dismounting quickly once they reached it. Yates positioned himself behind a large tree, rifle ready, while Hazel held the horses' reins, keeping them quiet. The riders appeared over the hill, a group of 6 men moving at a steady pace. Even at this distance, something about them sent a chill of recognition down Hazel's spine. "It's them," she whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. "The second man from the left, that's Harden. I'd recognize him anywhere." Yates's knuckles whitened on his rifle. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely," Hazel confirmed, memories of the outlaw's leering face flashing vividly in her mind. "He's the one who—" She couldn't finish the sentence, understanding darkened Yates's expression. "Stay here," he ordered. "Keep the horses quiet. I'm going to move closer, try to hear where they're headed." "Be careful," Hazel urged, fear clutching at her heart. Yates squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, then moved silently away, using the sparse vegetation for cover as he worked his way closer to the outlaw's path. Alone with the horses, Hazel found herself trembling, though whether from fear or anticipation, she wasn't sure. These were the men who had killed innocent travelers without hesitation, who had staked her out to die a slow, agonizing death, who had taken Yates's sister and murdered her husband. Now, by chance or fate, they had crossed paths again. What would happen when Yates confronted them? 6 against 1 were terrible odds, even for someone as capable as Yates. The thought of losing him made Hazel's chest tighten painfully. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only 15 minutes, Yates returned, his expression grim. "They're headed for a place called Diablo Crossing," he reported in a low voice. "It's a border town, barely more than a few buildings and a lot of trouble. They mentioned meeting someone there, a buyer for whatever they stole from their last raid." "Did they say anything about Marion?" Hazel asked anxiously. Yates shook his head. "Nothing specific, but they talked about merchandise they were planning to sell." His jaw tightened. "I think they mean women, possibly Marion, possibly others." Horror washed over Hazel. "We have to stop them." "We will," Yates promised, his voice hard with determination. "Diablo Crossing is about a day's ride from here. If we push hard, we can get there by tomorrow evening, maybe even catch them before they make whatever deal they're planning." "What's your plan?" Hazel asked, already gathering the horse's reins in preparation to move. Yates helped her mount before answering. "We'll follow at a distance today, make sure they're really headed where they said. Then tomorrow we'll ride ahead, take a different route to reach Diablo Crossing before them. I know the area. There's a trail that cuts through the hills that they won't take with a large group." And then, Hazel pressed. Yates swung into his saddle, his expression resolute. Then I find Marion and get her out, whatever it takes. We find her, Hazel corrected gently. I'm with you, Yates, all the way. For a moment, Yates looked as though he might argue, then his expression softened and he nodded. All right, we find her together. They set off at a careful pace, keeping enough distance between themselves and the hardened gang to avoid detection while still tracking their movement. The day stretched long and hot, the tension between them palpable as they followed the distant dust cloud that marked their quarry's passage. By evening, they had confirmed the gang's direction definitely headed toward Diablo Crossing, just as they'd overheard. They made a cold camp that night, unwilling to risk a fire that might be spotted. Instead, they ate jerky and hardtack, washed down with water, and planned their approach for the next day. The shortcut through the hills will save us several hours, Yates explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. It's a hard trail, steep in places, barely wide enough for a horse, but it'll get us to Diablo Crossing by midday. Hardin and his men won't arrive until late afternoon at the earliest. That gives us time to scout the town, find out if Marion is with them, Hazel added, following his reasoning. Exactly. Yates looked up at her, admiration clear in his eyes. You really are remarkable, you know that. Most women would be halfway to Dallas by now, not planning an ambush on a gang of outlaws. Hazel smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Most women haven't had the benefit of your tutelage, Mr. Novak. A chuckle escaped him, the sound warming Hazel more than any fire could have. I'm not sure I deserve credit for your courage. I think that was there all along. Their eyes met in the darkness, and Hazel felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. There was so much she wanted to say to him, so many feelings she wanted to express, but this wasn't the time. Not with Marion's fate hanging in the balance and danger surrounding them on all sides. We should rest, she said instead. Tomorrow will test us both. Yates nodded, though his gaze lingered on her face a moment longer. Wake me for the second watch, he reminded her as she prepared to take the first vigil. I will, Hazel promised, though she had every intention of letting him sleep through the night. He would need all his strength and wits about him for what lay ahead. As Yates settled into his bedroll, Hazel took up her position, rifle across her knees as he had taught her. The night stretched vast and star-filled above them, the distant howl of a coyote the only sound breaking the silence. In the stillness, Hazel found her thoughts turning to the future. What would happen after they rescued Marion? Would Yates want to see justice done on the Hardin gang, or would saving his sister be enough? And what of her own plans? Dallas and her uncle seemed a distant memory now, a life that belonged to someone else. These questions had no answers yet, Hazel knew. All that mattered now was the next day, the rescue attempt, and keeping both themselves and Marion alive through whatever came. With that thought firmly in mind, Hazel settled into her watch, determined to let Yates rest undisturbed until dawn. The trail through the hills proved to be every bit as challenging as Yates had described, narrow, rocky, and steep in places, with sheer drops that made Hazel's stomach lurch. But true to his word, it brought them to the outskirts of Diablo Crossing shortly after midday, hours ahead of the Hardin gang. The town, if it could be called that, was little more than a collection of weathered buildings straddling the border between Texas and Mexico. A saloon, a general store, a few houses, and what appeared to be a livery stable made up the entirety of the settlement. The atmosphere was one of transience and lawlessness, a place where men came to conduct business away from the eyes of civilization. Yates led them to a stand of trees a short distance from town where they could observe without being seen. We need to find out if Marion is already here, he said, his voice tense with anticipation, and where they're keeping her. How do we do that without revealing ourselves? Hazel asked, scanning the dusty street that constituted the town center. I'll go in, Yates decided. Alone, I can pass as just another drifter, ask some casual questions. He turned to Hazel, his expression grave. You need to stay here out of sight if Hardin or any of his men recognize you. Hazel wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. Her presence would only endanger their mission. All right, she agreed reluctantly, but be careful and come back to me. The last words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more of her feelings than she had intended. Yates's expression softened and he reached out to touch her cheek gently. I will, he promised. Always. The simple word held a wealth of meaning, and Hazel's heart swelled with emotions too complex to name. She covered his hand with her own for a brief moment, then forced herself to step back. Go, she said. Find out what you can. I'll keep watch from here. Yates nodded, his gaze lingering on her face as if committing it to memory. Then he turned and headed toward the town, his posture deliberately casual, just another traveler arriving in a border settlement. Alone, Hazel positioned herself where she could observe both the town and the trail from which the hardened gang would eventually appear. The waiting was agonizing. Every minute that Yates was out of her sight felt like an hour, every distant sound making her tense in anticipation of trouble. Finally, after what seemed an eternity but was probably less than an hour, Yates returned. His expression was grim, his movements quick and purposeful. They have her, he said without preamble, Marion and 2 other women. They're being held in a back room of the saloon, guarded by one of Hardin's men. His voice was tight with controlled fury. They're planning to sell them tonight to a Mexican brothel owner who's arriving at sunset. Hazel felt sick at the confirmation of their fears. Then we don't have much time. No, Yates agreed, and it gets worse. The rest of Hardin's gang is expected within the hour. They sent a rider ahead to prepare for their arrival. What's your plan? Hazel asked, already checking her revolver, a smaller weapon Yates had purchased for her in Riverton. Yates paced, his mind clearly working through possibilities. I need to get into that back room before the rest of the gang arrives. Once they're all here, it'll be nearly impossible to get the women out without a firefight, and that puts Marion at risk. Could we create a distraction? Hazel suggested, something to draw the guard away from the door long enough for you to get inside. Yates considered this, then nodded slowly. That might work, but it would mean you'd have to enter the town, and that's dangerous. No more dangerous than what those women are facing, Hazel pointed out. I can handle it. Yates studied her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Then he sighed. All right, but we do this carefully and you stay out of sight as much as possible. Together, they formulated a plan. Hazel would enter the town from the opposite direction, creating a commotion near the livery stable far enough from the saloon to seem unrelated, but significant enough to draw attention, including that of the guard. Meanwhile, Yates would use the distraction to enter the saloon through a back entrance he had discovered during his reconnaissance. If anything goes wrong, Yates told her, his hands gripping her shoulders, you ride for the border. Don't wait for me, don't try to help. Just get yourself to safety. I'm not leaving without you, Hazel said firmly, or without those women. Hazel, no, Yates, she interrupted. We're in this together. I won't abandon you or them. He looked as though he wanted to argue further, but instead he pulled her into a sudden, fierce embrace. You are the most stubborn, brave, infuriating woman I have ever met, he murmured against her hair. Hazel returned the embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. And don't you forget it, she whispered back. When they separated, something had changed between them, a deepening of connection, a shared purpose that went beyond the immediate danger. There was no time to explore these feelings, however. The mission ahead required their full attention. They moved to their positions, Hazel circling wide to approach the town from the east while Yates prepared to move in from the west, closer to the saloon. The plan was simple, but dangerous success would depend on timing and luck, both of which had been in short supply lately. Taking a deep breath, Hazel urged her horse forward, mentally rehearsing her role. She would pose as a lost traveler, creating confusion and hopefully drawing attention away from the saloon long enough for Yates to make his move. As she rode into town, Hazel forced herself to appear confused and distressed rather than terrified, which was closer to her actual state. She reined in near the livery, calling out in a deliberately distraught voice. Hello, is anyone here? I need help. Her performance had the desired effect. Several men emerged from nearby buildings, including the livery stable owner, all curious about the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in their remote settlement. "What's the trouble, miss?" the stable owner asked, approaching cautiously. Hazel launched into her prepared story about being separated from her traveling party, embellishing it with details designed to keep the men's attention focused on her rather than the saloon across the street. She was acutely aware of time passing, of the need to maintain the distraction long enough for Yates to complete his part of the plan. To her relief, more townspeople gathered, drawn by the novelty of a respectable-looking woman appearing in their rough settlement. Among them, she noticed a man who matched Yates's description of the guard from the saloon, his curiosity evidently overcoming his duty. Now, Hazel thought, praying that Yates was watching and would seize the opportunity. She deliberately heightened her performance, becoming more agitated, ensuring that all eyes remained on her. Across town, Yates saw his chance. With the guard distracted by whatever commotion Hazel had created, he slipped around to the rear of the saloon. The back door was locked, but a swift kick splintered the aging wood around the latch, allowing him access. Inside, he found himself in a narrow hallway. 3 doors led off it to clearly storage rooms, based on the crates visible through the partially open doors. The third was closed, and Yates noted with grim satisfaction, secured with a padlock. Drawing his revolver, Yates approached the locked door. He could hear movement inside, soft voices, one of which he thought might be Marion's. His heart pounding, he aimed at the padlock and fired. The shot was loud in the confined space, but Yates was counting on the noise from the saloon proper to cover it. The padlock shattered, pieces of metal flying in all directions. Without hesitation, Yates pushed the door open. 3 women huddled inside the small room, their expressions shifting from fear to hope as they registered Yates's presence. One of them, a petite blonde with familiar blue eyes, let out a soft cry of recognition. "Yates, is it really you, Marion?" Yates breathed, relief washing over him. "Thank God!" He moved quickly to his sister, embracing her briefly before turning to assess the other women, one middle-aged with a dignified bearing despite her disheveled appearance, the other younger, perhaps 18, with dark hair and terrified eyes. "We don't have much time," Yates told them, keeping his voice low. "Hardin and the rest of his gang will be here any minute. We need to move now." "How?" the middle-aged woman asked. "They've kept us locked in here for days. The town is full of their associates." "I have help," Yates said, thinking of Hazel with a surge of both pride and fear. "And horses waiting outside town, but we have to move fast and stay together." Marion nodded, her expression resolute despite the ordeal she had clearly endured. "Lead the way, brother." Yates checked the hallway, then guided the women toward the back door. They moved as quietly as possible, though Yates knew their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Sooner or later, the guard would return to his post and discover their escape. Outside, Yates led the women away from the saloon, keeping to the shadows between buildings. His plan was to circle around to where Hazel was creating her distraction, then all flee together to their horses hidden in the trees. They had almost reached the main street when shouts erupted from the direction of the saloon. Their escape had been discovered. "Run," Yates ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. "Head for the livery stable. My friend is there." The women needed no further encouragement, following Yates as he led them toward the gathering of townspeople, where he could see Hazel still maintaining her role at the center of attention. Across the street, Hazel saw them coming. Without missing a beat, she shifted her performance, pointing dramatically in the opposite direction. "There they are, my traveling companions, thank heavens." The distraction worked momentarily, several townspeople turning to look where she pointed. In the confusion, Yates and the 3 women reached Hazel's side. "Time to go," he said tersely, taking her arm, but before they could move toward the edge of town, a shout rang out from the direction of the saloon. "There they are, the women are escaping." The guard had returned and raised the alarm. Worse, from the south end of town, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of riders, the rest of the Hardin gang, arriving earlier than expected. "This way," Yates urged, changing direction to avoid the approaching outlaws. "We need to reach the horses." The small group ran, the women summoning strength born of desperation. Behind them, confusion erupted as the guards' shouts alerted others to the escape. Gunshots rang out, bullets thudding into the dirt around them. Yates returned fire, providing covering fire as they fled. Hazel drew her own revolver, though she hoped she wouldn't need to use it. They had nearly reached the edge of town when a horseman appeared in their path, Clay Hardin himself, having ridden ahead of his gang. His face contorted with rage as he recognized both Marion and, to Hazel's horror, Hazel herself. "Well, well," he sneered, leveling his gun at them. "Look who's alive and causing trouble. Should have made sure you were dead in that desert, girlie." Before he could fire, Yates stepped forward, his own gun aimed directly at Hardin's heart. "Drop it, Hardin," he ordered, his voice deadly calm, "or I'll put a bullet through you right now." Hardin's eyes flicked to Yates, recognition dawning. "The brother," he said with a twisted smile. "Figured you might come looking eventually. Too bad you won't be leaving here alive." The standoff stretched for a tense moment, neither man willing to back down. Then, with a movement too quick to track, Hardin swung his gun toward Marion. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Hardin jerked backward, blood blossoming on his chest from Yates's bullet. But his own shot had found a target as well. The young, dark-haired woman who had been standing next to Marion fell with a cry, clutching her shoulder. "Emily." The middle-aged woman cried, dropping to her knees beside the injured girl. Yates moved swiftly to Hardin, kicking his gun away and checking to ensure he was no longer a threat. The outlaw leader was still alive, but barely, blood bubbling at his lips as he struggled for breath. "That's for my brother-in-law," Yates said grimly, "and for every other innocent person you've hurt." Hardin managed a final sneer before the light faded from his eyes. There was no time to process what had happened. The rest of Hardin's gang was approaching rapidly, and gunfire continued from the saloon, where the guard and likely others were pursuing them. "We need to move now," Yates said, helping the middle-aged woman lift the injured Emily to her feet. "Our horses are just beyond those trees." Together, they fled the town, bullets flying around them as they ran. Yates and Hazel provided covering fire, allowing the 3 women to reach the relative safety of the trees first. Once they reached the horses, new problems presented themselves. They had only 2 mounts for 5 people, and one of their party was injured and weakening rapidly. "Marion, you take Hazel's horse," Yates decided quickly. "Mrs. Porter and Emily will ride double on mine. Hazel and I will follow on foot until we can find more horses." "No," Marion protested. "We stay together." "There's no time to argue," Yates said firmly. "They'll be on us any minute. Head north toward Riverton. It's 3 days' ride. We'll meet you there." "Yates," Hazel began, concern in her voice. "Trust me," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I'll get us out of this, I promise." Something in his gaze convinced her. Hazel nodded and helped the women mount, making sure Emily was secure despite her injury. "Riverton," she confirmed. "We'll be waiting for you." With a final glance back, Marion urged her horse forward, leading the way north with Mrs. Porter and Emily following close behind. Within moments, they had disappeared into the gathering dusk. "Now what?" Hazel asked, turning to Yates. "They'll be searching for us any minute." "Now," Yates said grimly, "we find another way out of here." The sound of approaching riders spurred them into motion. They moved deeper into the trees, seeking cover as the remnants of the Hardin gang spread out to search for their escaped captives and the people who had helped them. Night fell completely as they evaded their pursuers, using the darkness to their advantage. Yates led them on a circuitous route away from the border town, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated by starlight. By midnight, they had put several miles between themselves and Diablo Crossing, though Yates remained vigilant for signs of pursuit. They paused in a small hollow, both exhausted from the continuous movement and tension. "We need horses," Yates said, surveying their surroundings. "There's a ranch about 5 miles east of here. The owner, Mendoza, is a good man. He might help us." 5 miles, Hazel repeated, trying not to show how tired she was. The events of the day had drained her physically and emotionally, Yates noticed despite her efforts. "We can rest for an hour," he conceded, "but we need to keep moving." "Hardin's men won't give up easily. especially now that we've killed their leader." As they settled against a large boulder, Hazel found herself shivering despite the mild night. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving her cold and trembling. Without comment, Yates put his arm around her, drawing her close against his side. The simple gesture provided both warmth and comfort, anchoring Hazel in the midst of chaos. "You were magnificent today," Yates said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "We did it together," Hazel replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "And we got them out. Marion is safe." "Thanks to you," Yates emphasized. "Your distraction was perfect. You kept your head even when everything went wrong." He paused, then added quietly, "You're an extraordinary woman, Hazel Wright." Something in his tone made Hazel lift her head to look at him. In the faint starlight, his face was mostly in shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze. "Yates," she began, unsure what she wanted to say. He silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "Not now," he murmured. "When we're safe, when we have time, there's much I want to say to you, but for now, just know that meeting you even under such terrible circumstances has been the greatest blessing of my life." Hazel's heart swelled with emotion. Unable to find words, she simply nodded, then leaned her head back against his shoulder. They remained that way for the hour Yates had allotted for rest, drawing strength from each other's presence. When it was time to move on, they did so together, hand in hand when the terrain allowed it, their connection a source of courage in the uncertain night. The Mendoza Ranch appeared as a cluster of low buildings silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Yates approached cautiously, alert for any sign of danger, but the ranch seemed peaceful in the early morning quiet. "Wait here," he told Hazel, concealing her in a stand of brush near the main house. "Let me make sure it's safe." Hazel nodded, too exhausted to argue. She watched as Yates moved silently toward the house, his figure gradually disappearing in the darkness. Alone, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been on a stagecoach headed for Dallas, anticipating a quiet life with her uncle. Now she was hiding near a remote ranch, having helped rescue 3 women from outlaws, with the law and the remnants of a dangerous gang potentially pursuing them. And then there was Yates. In the span of days, he had become central to her existence in ways she could never have anticipated. The thought of returning to Dallas, of resuming the life she had planned, seemed hollow now. Whatever the future held, she knew it had to include him. Yates's return interrupted her thoughts. He was not alone. An older Mexican man accompanied him, his expression serious but kind. "Senor Mendoza has agreed to help us," Yates explained as Hazel emerged from her hiding place. "He's giving us horses and supplies to reach Riverton." "You are welcome at my ranch," Mendoza said, inclining his head respectfully toward Hazel. "My wife is preparing food for you both." "Then you must rest before continuing your journey." "That's very generous," Hazel said, "but we're being pursued. We don't want to bring trouble to your home." Mendoza waved away her concern. "The Hardin gang has terrorized these lands for too long." "Many will celebrate hearing of Clay Hardin's death," he smiled grimly. "And my sons are well armed and vigilant. No one will threaten my home." Hazel glanced at Yates, who nodded reassuringly. "We can rest for a few hours," he said. "We both need it, and the horses will be fresher if we depart around noon." The decision made, they followed Mendoza to his home, where his wife, a dignified woman with silver-streaked dark hair, welcomed them with quiet hospitality. Hot food, coffee, and the chance to wash away the grime of their flight revived Hazel's spirits considerably. Afterwards, Mendoza showed them to a small guest room with 2 narrow beds. "Rest," he urged. "My sons and I will keep watch." When he had gone, Hazel sank onto one of the beds, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. "Do you think Marion and the others made it away safely?" she asked, voicing the concern that had been foremost in her mind. "Marion is resourceful," Yates replied, sitting on the opposite bed. "And she has the best horse and a clear path north." "Yes, I believe they're safe." Hazel nodded, allowing herself to believe it as well. "And us, will we reach Riverton safely?" Yates met her gaze, his expression serious. "I won't lie to you, Hazel, the journey won't be easy." Hardin's remaining men will be hunting us, and we're heading back through territory they know well. He paused. But I made you a promise that I intend to keep. I will get you safely to Riverton, and then to Dallas if that's still what you want. The last part caught Hazel's attention. If that's what I want, she repeated. What do you mean? Yates looked away, suddenly seeming uncertain, a stark contrast to his usual confidence. I mean that plans change, he said carefully. Experiences change us. After all that's happened, I wouldn't presume to know what you want now. Understanding dawned. You're asking if I still intend to go to Dallas, Hazel said softly. Yes, Yates admitted, meeting her eyes again, or if perhaps you might consider another path. Hazel's heart quickened its pace. What other path, Yates? She asked, needing to hear him say it. Yates rose from his bed and came to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. A path with me, he said simply. I know it's too soon, that we've known each other only days, but those days have shown me more of your character, your courage, your heart than years might reveal in ordinary circumstances. He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle patterns on the backs of her hands. I don't have much to offer, no home, no stability, just a life that's been focused on finding Marion, but I do have a future now, one that I'd like to build, with you if you're willing. The directness of his declaration took Hazel's breath away. In Boston society, courtship was a lengthy, formal process, with feelings carefully concealed behind proper behavior and platitudes. This straightforward profession was utterly different and utterly perfect. Yates, she said, squeezing his hands. When you found me in that desert, you saved more than my life. You showed me a different way to live, a different kind of strength. She smiled, tears threatening. I can't imagine my future without you in it. Relief and joy transformed Yates's expression. Then you'll stay with me. Even knowing the risks, the uncertainties? Yes, Hazel said without hesitation. Life holds no guarantees, Yates. I've learned that lesson well, but I'd rather face whatever comes with you than settle for safety without you. Yates raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. I love you, Hazel Wright, he said softly. I think I have since the moment you opened your eyes in that desert and looked at me like I was a miracle. You were a miracle, Hazel whispered. My miracle? She leaned into his touch, and I love you too. The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous and perfect. Then, slowly, Yates leaned forward, giving Hazel every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that sealed their declaration more eloquently than words ever could. When they separated, Yates rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. We should rest, he said eventually, though he made no move to release her. The journey ahead will test us both. Together, Hazel reminded him. Whatever comes, we face it together. Yates nodded, reluctantly rising to return to his own bed. Together, he agreed, his voice a promise. As Hazel settled into her bed, exhaustion finally claiming her, her last conscious thought was not of danger or pursuit, but of the future she and Yates would build together, a future born in the harsh crucible of the desert, but promising something far more beautiful than either of them could have imagined alone. The journey to Riverton took 4 days longer than anticipated due to the need to avoid main trails where Hardin's men might be searching for them. Yates and Hazel traveled cautiously, often by night, using Yates's knowledge of the territory to find hidden paths and sheltered campsites. Despite the danger and hardship, Hazel found an unexpected joy in these days. The bond between her and Yates deepened with each shared challenge, each quiet conversation around a small fire, each moment of watching the vast western landscape unfold before them. When they finally rode into Riverton, dusty and weary but triumphant, it was to find Marion, Mrs. Porter, and Emily already safely arrived and recuperating at the small hotel. The reunion between the siblings was emotional, Marion throwing herself into Yates's arms with a cry of relief that brought tears to Hazel's eyes. I knew you'd make it, Marion said, wiping away her own tears. I told them you were too stubborn to die. Yates chuckled, the sound reflecting a lightness Hazel had rarely heard from him. Had good reason to stay alive, he said, his gaze finding Hazel over his sister's shoulder, Marian followed his look, her expression shifting to one of understanding and delight. "So that's how it is," she said, moving to embrace Hazel. "Thank you for bringing my brother back to me in more ways than one, I think." The following days in Riverton were spent in recovery and planning. Emily's wound, while painful, was healing well under the town doctor's care. Mrs. Porter, who turned out to be a schoolteacher from Austin, was arranging to return to her family in the East. And Marian, once she learned of Hazel and Yates's intentions, insisted on accompanying them at least as far as Dallas. "I want to meet this uncle of yours," she told Hazel. "Make sure he understands what a treasure he almost had living with him." The comment made Hazel remember her original purpose in coming west. "I should send another telegram to Uncle Howard," she realized. "Let him know what's happened and that I won't be coming to stay after all." Yates looked concerned. "Are you sure, Hazel? Your uncle might be able to offer you a more stable life than I can right now." "I'm sure," Hazel said firmly. "My place is with you. Uncle Howard will understand. He's always encouraged me to follow my heart." The telegram was sent, and the reply came the next day. "Relieved you are safe. Disappointed not to have you with me, but understand love's call. Bring your young man to Dallas. Want to meet the fellow who won my niece's heart. Uncle Howard." "Well," Yates said when Hazel showed him the message, "I suppose we're going to Dallas after all." The journey to Dallas was far more pleasant than their previous travels. No outlaws in pursuit. No desperate rescue to attempt. Just the companionable presence of Marian and the growing certainty of the future Hazel and Yates would build together. Howard Wright proved to be everything Hazel had described: a kind, elderly gentleman with a twinkle in his eye and a genuine delight in his niece's happiness. He welcomed Yates warmly, asking pointed but good-natured questions about his intentions and plans. "So you're planning to settle somewhere?" Howard asked over dinner in his comfortable Dallas home. "Not continue your wandering ways now that your sister is safe," Yates nodded, his hand finding Hazel's under the table. "I was thinking of returning to medicine," he said. "There are plenty of small towns in need of a doctor." Howard looked pleased. "A noble profession, and where were you considering settling?" Yates glanced at Hazel, a question in his eyes. They had discussed various possibilities but made no firm decisions. "We thought perhaps northern Texas," Hazel answered. "Close enough to visit you regularly, Uncle Howard, but far enough north to avoid the worst of the summer heat." Howard chuckled. "Wise choice. The summers here can be brutal." He studied the couple thoughtfully. "You know, there's a small town about 2 days' ride north of here, Clearwater Springs. Last I heard, they were in desperate need of a doctor. Good people, growing community." He smiled at Hazel. "Might be a fine place for a young couple to put down roots." The suggestion sparked immediate interest. After dinner, Howard showed them a map, pointing out Clearwater Springs and describing what he knew of the town and surrounding area. "I have some business connections there," he added. "I could write ahead, let them know you're coming. Might smooth your way a bit." Yates and Hazel exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll consider it," Yates said. "Thank you, Mr. Wright." "Howard, please," the older man insisted. "We're to be family, after all." The reminder brought a flush to Hazel's cheeks and a smile to Yates's lips. Though they had spoken of a future together, they had not yet discussed marriage explicitly. Howard's casual acknowledgement of what seemed obvious to him prompted a more formal conversation that night as Yates walked Hazel in the garden behind her uncle's home. "Your uncle seems to have certain expectations," Yates observed, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Uncle Howard has always been direct," Hazel replied, smiling. "But he's not wrong, is he, about us being family?" Yates stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his expression was one of such tenderness that Hazel's breath caught in her throat. "No," he said softly, "he's not wrong, but I should do this properly." He took her hands in his. "Hazel Wright, these past weeks have shown me what true courage, true partnership, and true love look like. You've become essential to me in ways I never imagined possible. Will you marry me, build a life with me, face whatever comes beside me?" Though Hazel had known this was coming, the actual moment still filled her with overwhelming emotion. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. Yes, Yates Novak, I will marry you. The kiss that sealed their engagement was deeper, more profound than any they had shared before. A promise, a covenant, a beginning. When they returned to the house, Howard took one look at their faces and broke into a broad smile. Well, he said, I suppose we'll be planning a wedding soon. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Dallas, a small but joyful affair with Marion as Hazel's attendant and Howard standing proudly in place of Hazel's father. Mrs. Abernathy from Riverton made the journey to attend, as did Mrs. Porter and a recovered Emily, who had decided to remain in Texas rather than return east. After the celebration, the newly married couple set out for Clearwater Springs, Marion accompanying them with plans to establish her own millinery shop in the growing town. Howard's letters of introduction proved invaluable. The town welcomed them enthusiastically, particularly Yates with his medical training. Within months, they had established themselves as integral parts of the community. Yates's practice flourished, his skill and compassion quickly earning the trust of the townspeople. Hazel, drawing on her Boston education, began teaching at the small school, eventually taking over as headmistress when the previous one retired. Their home, a modest but comfortable house on the edge of town, became known for its warmth and hospitality. Marion's shop next door added to the family compound, her artistic talents making it a success among the ladies of Clearwater Springs and surrounding areas. Life wasn't always easy. The frontier presented constant challenges, from harsh weather to occasional illness to the periodic threat of lawlessness. But Hazel and Yates faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. 2 years after their arrival in Clearwater Springs, their family expanded with the birth of their son, Howard Jack Novak, named for Hazel's uncle and Yates's fallen brother-in-law. Marion, delighted with her role as aunt, spoiled the boy shamelessly. On the evening of Howard's first birthday, Hazel found Yates on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and golds. She joined him, their son sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, leaning against him as his arm circled her waist. Yates smiled, the expression coming much more easily to him now than when they had first met. "I was thinking about the desert," he admitted, "about how close we both came to never having this." He gestured to their home, their sleeping son, the life they had built together. "Providence," Hazel said softly, echoing what he had called their meeting long ago. "We were meant to find each other, even in that terrible place." Yates nodded, drawing her closer. "I never believed in fate until I found you staked out in that desert," he said. "Now I can't imagine any other path my life could have taken." "Nor can I," Hazel agreed. She looked down at their son, his features so like his father's in miniature, "and this is just the beginning." As if to confirm her words, life continued to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. Their family grew again 2 years later with the birth of their daughter, Marion Elizabeth. Uncle Howard visited regularly, becoming the beloved grandfather figure to their children that their own parents could never be. The town of Clearwater Springs flourished as well, growing from a modest settlement to a thriving community. Yates trained a younger doctor to assist him as his practice expanded, while Hazel's school became known throughout the region for its excellent education. There were sorrows, too, of course news of Mrs. Abernathy's passing reached them one winter, and Hardin's remaining gang members occasionally made trouble in the territory, though never again for the Novak family directly. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows, each day bringing new reasons to be grateful for the life they had forged together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Hazel with a gift, a small silver canteen, engraved with their initials and the date he had found her in the desert. "To remind us," he said as she turned the beautiful object in her hands, "that sometimes salvation comes in the simplest forms like water in the desert, or love when we least expect it." Hazel's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that moment, the cool water against her parched lips, the gentle hands that had freed her from certain death, the blue eyes that had looked at her with such concern. How far they had come from that desperate beginning. "I've never forgotten," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Not for a single day." As their children grew, Hazel and Yates shared with them the story of how they met, a carefully edited version at first, more detailed as they matured. Howard and Marion Jr. listened with wide eyes to the tale of their mother staked out in the desert, their father's timely arrival, and the dangerous rescue of their aunt. "It's like something from a book," young Marion exclaimed once. "Better than any book," Yates corrected her gently. "Because it's true." The truth of their beginnings shaped their family in countless ways, fostering courage, compassion, and a deep appreciation for the unexpected turns life could take. It taught their children that love could be born in the harshest circumstances, that strength often emerged in the most desperate moments, and that sometimes the greatest blessings arrived when all hope seemed lost. As the years passed and Clearwater Springs grew into a proper town with a railroad connection and all the trappings of civilization, Hazel sometimes marveled at how far they had come from that fateful day in the desert. The scared, sunburned woman staked to the ground could never have imagined the life that lay ahead, a life rich with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of challenges met and overcome together. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was peaceful, Hazel and Yates would often sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. In those moments, with his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him, Hazel felt the full circle of their journey from desperate strangers to partners in every sense of the word. "Do you ever wonder," she asked on one such evening, their silver anniversary approaching, "what would have happened if you hadn't decided to track those outlaws, if our paths had never crossed?" Yates considered the question, his fingers absently stroking her hair, now streaked with silver that matched his own. "I used to," he admitted, "but not anymore. Some things are simply meant to be, Hazel. Some connections are written in the stars long before we recognize them." Hazel smiled, hearing in his words the echo of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, still thoughtful, still capable of surprising her with unexpected poetry. "My miracle in the desert," she murmured, "still miraculous after all this time." Yates's arm tightened around her. "And still grateful for every day I've had with you." As they sat together, watching night claim the sky, Hazel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the brutality of being staked out under the merciless sun to the peaceful contentment of their shared life, from the desperate fear of impending death to the quiet joy of growing old together, every step had led them here. To this home, this family, this love that had only deepened with the passing years. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she boarded that stagecoach bound for Dallas so long ago. It was infinitely better, richer, more challenging, more rewarding than anything she could have envisioned for herself. And it had all begun with a canteen of water, offered by a stranger in her darkest hour, a simple act of humanity that had blossomed into a lifetime of love. Hazel had been staked out to die, but instead she had found life in its fullest measure, proving that even in the harshest desert, hope could take root and flourish, transforming desolation into paradise.